Jacob and Walt have a lot in common, which is part of the reason they're such loggerheads. People say, well, you're so mean, you're so bad. And I admit that Jacob is rude. He's extremely rude. But, he breaks the rules in much the same vein that Longmire breaks the rules. Longmire will do anything to advance what he perceives to be the greater good. That's just the fact on the ground.
It's the cowboy way.
It's the cowboy way.
Yeah.
You get it done. You do it.
Hi, I'm Rob Ward. Welcome to A Word on Westerns. And once again, we have a special treat for you. We have an Emmy-winning actor who made his television debut in a Western. That Western was The Outcast. You know him from Longmire. You know him from Santa Barbara. And I know all of you know him as Cimarron from the great John Wayne classic, The Cowboys. A Martinez is right here with me. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Rob. Appreciate that.
Well, I'm so glad you're here.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, the question that I have before we get into your cowboy stuff,
Yeah.
where did your name A come from?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good question. My daddy and my granddaddy and I all share the name Adolfo, and they called my daddy A.D. or Junior. And he called me A or A-frame or A-bone, mainly A-bone. Or, little A when they were, trying to keep me in my place, I guess. So it was always A. It was a nickname my dad gave me. He gave all of us nicknames, and I drew A.
Well, that's the top of the list.
That's right. It's not a bad letter if you're going to be, identified by a letter.
I'm a W. I'm at the bottom of every list.
I'm sorry, Val.
It's the way it goes. I know you did a couple of films with our pal, Robert Forster. You did the first one, Nakia, which was his series shot in Santa Fe and Taos.
Right.
What do you remember about working with Robert?
I remember how kind he was, how smart and kind he was, and I loved, because he was sort of he was the boss of the second thing I did with him, the movie, and he
with
allowed
Joe
that to
Spinell,
happen.
that one, right?
Joe Spinell,
yeah.
right. Joe Spinell. Joe Spinell was, I don't know, I thought Joe Spinell got a little bit too rambunctious in my fight scene with him. You don't want to come out of a movie actually hurting.
No.
And I came out of that movie hurting after I tangled with Joe Spinell. My wife was one of the first things she ever saw me do, and she came to the set that day, and she said afterwards, she said, "Is it always like that?" I go, "No, this was a little bit. Got a little bit
As you
deeper."
limp off.
It was a gross thing that he had to do to me in the movie. He had to basically finish me off with a drill. Twice I've been killed via drill.
Whoa.
Which is a tough way to go. But I also hacked off my ear and stuff like that. But I loved working with Bobby, and I got to play a guy that had his back. My manager, I was negotiating for Ambulance. I was like trying to find a correct pay grade with Michael Bay's movie.
It's a big budget.
It's a big budget. I think it's Michael Bay. He can pay me, and my manager, I say this to my managers, they're offering you this part, and I'm going, well, I think I could use a little more money. And he goes, he'd be quiet, and he goes, okay. I represented Bob Forster, and I went to a thing, and I saw him one day giving a speech in front of a bunch of people, and he said to the folks, he said, it's funny about this business. You can be over and not know it for like 2 years. You just think, well, the phone's like a little bit thin right now, but the truth is, the idea has like percolated around the network that you're over, but no one tells you. And I'm thinking, why is my manager telling me that?
Are you over?
Mark, am I over? Why are you saying that to me? In the moment, I didn't actually articulate to that, but he was basically counseling me on, don't blow this gig over, your sense of, how much that you should be paid, because, there's a line of people that want this part.
Robert said yes to practically everything, too, though, and he always brought something special to the role.
Yeah, well, he's, he was especially kind of like a real human. He brought his real humanness to it. He was a human.
In Nakia, he played a Native American,
right.
Sheriff there in Taos with Arthur Kennedy. You actually are part Native American.
Yeah.
What is your feeling about people like Robert or Jeff Chandler who played Cochise? I mean, times have changed a lot, where now the Native Americans all get a shot and, are doing great work.
Yeah, things have gotten a lot better. Plus, I think the kind of understanding about the line that got drawn, like I have DNA from that big pool of indigenous people who lived, in the Southwest in northern Mexico, and a lot of those people have a lot in common in their blood, but a line got drawn, and then Mexico was colonialized in a different way than America was. So languages got bifurcated, and there was distance driven in that part of time. But that is, people have started to acknowledge that and understand it better. My thought is, especially if you in that part of the world, there is so much intermingling. There's so much, like my daddy had 8% African American blood, and so where'd that come from? How'd that get in there? But I just I think it's a wonderful development. It's so long overdue. When you, especially among people that have had such a difficult time since 1492. It's like it's been tough, right, in a lot of levels, and so it's overdue for there to be some semblance of justice in the storytelling. I mean, what's happening now with res dogs and where you're having actually Indians in the writers' room, right? It's an amazing thing to see happen. My beef with it more grossly, I think the one time that it really hit me up against my chin is watching Larry Bishop, may he rest in peace. Oh. Watching Larry Bishop playing Indian in some Western movie and just think, I mean, come on, dude. If you're going to do it, at least make a better effort. Don't play it quite so like.
In Nakia, I think, wasn't Victor Zori in that episode with you, too?
I believe he was,
and he played a lot of Native Americans over the years. Yeah. Other things, too.
Yeah, sure. Well, you understand the way the world worked back in the day. I was, when we were out in Santa Fe, John Wayne, his Playboy interview was published where he said he believed in the supremacy of white people until the other people could get their stuff together and stuff like that. And, you kind of go, well, yeah, that was sort of the currency of the day. This is the way the world works. Everybody's in their place. It didn't take into account the fact that the reason everything was like this is because it was leveraged to stay this way. And I thought that it was, it made sense in the time, but as times have changed and people have become more conscious of these imbalances, it's really imperative to fix them. I have so many friends right now that scoff at the term woke. It's like, if you're woke, it's like, seriously, you're woke now? And I think to myself, if you're born on the wrong side of this cultural domination, you sort of have no choice but to be woke early on. You go, oh, I get it. I have to I'm going to have to be standing to a different standard here because, I'm a little branner than the average guy.
Well, you did one of the breakthrough movies and actually one of the best, a Sundance Award winner, Powwow Highway. You and Gary Farmer taking a road trip and finding yourselves. I mean, that's a wonderful movie, and it was so different at the time. It really broke some boundaries.
Yeah, and props to George Harrison, the Beatle, who actually produced it, right?
Was he on set ever, George?
No, he wasn't, but he came to the premiere. He was there, and Joni Mitchell was there, and Bonnie Raitt was there.
And Robbie Robertson did the soundtrack.
And Robbie Robertson did the soundtrack, and I mean it was phenomenal. And Gary Farmer is a genius. He's really one of the best American actors.
What a character!
Yeah, and so that was a miracle. And of course they've been trying to get that made for a decade, and then somebody got it to George Harrison, and of course he went sure. And here's the money. And when it came time that things got a little weird and we needed a little more money, he said, no, this was the money. So fix it, figure it out. So we had to. But yeah, it was amazing. And I got to actually say hello to him, and look him in the eye and say, man, I can't tell you how much you're work has meant to me in my life. And, you know, I'm sure over the course of his life, if you're a Beatle, you're getting told a version of this speech repeatedly. And he paused and held my eyes and let me say every kind of stammering word of it before he said, well, thank you, man. I liked what you did in the movie. And he pulled me in an embrace, gave me a little kiss on the cheek. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a good day to die, you know, when your heroes get to like...
Well, how did you get cast in that film? It is such a breakthrough movie.
Well, I was, you know, I was considered off the market because I was working on Santa Barbara.
Well, you got an Emmy for that. If you win an Emmy, you're off the market?
Well, I know. Well, I just, you know, it's like you shoot an hour show every single day. So, you know, they expect, especially if you're in front, and I was in front, they expect you to be around, right? I had the contractual right to leave and do things, right? And of course, they wanted me to be happy, so they would. But the word on the street is, you know, oh, he's doing this daytime show, he's off the market. And my friend Carl Weintraub, a friend of mine since my years basically living among the hippies in Venice, basically. He knew the casting director and said, you know, you should talk to A. He's probably got an out. He probably could come and do it. And they said, well, you know, we're kind of far down the road. And he goes, well, if I were you, I'd talk to A. And so they called me up and they brought me in. And they put me in a room with Gary Farmer.
Had you met Gary before?
I'd never met him. And Gary was cast. Gary was born to play Phil Bono. And so they put me in a room with Gary, and we just started improvising. And, of course, we clicked. And so then he went, wow, okay, well, I don't know. So what do you do? You're on a soap opera? What is, you know, the director, Jonathan Wax, who's, you know, from South Africa and a radical and an amazingly stern intellectual, and he's like, what are you doing over there? What is that stuff you're doing?
And you go, I'm paying the rent.
Well, I don't want to say, I'm feeding my family. But you know, we had lunch, and he kept asking me questions, and of course, in truth, my politics and the politics of Buddy Redbow were very resonant. So, you know, once I got to talk to him and we understood we had a lot in common about our vision of the way the world worked, he decided to give me a shot. And, you know, it was one of the great events of my life. Gary Farmer.
Yeah. Well, and Gary is fantastic. He's also done a couple of Longmire episodes.
Yeah, he played the contrary in Longmire. Yeah. And he's doing...
In the library, that was so cool.
Right, he's doing Resident Alien now, and he's been brilliant in Res Dogs. He's got a recurring guy on Res Dogs, and he's truly, when you talk about the great actors, I mean, you know, after 53 and a half years, you've seen a lot of good actors, and that guy stands right there at the top of the list.
Let's talk about Longmire a little bit, because those scripts are so good, and it shows the indigenous people in ways that have never been on television before, and the characters are so strong. I don't know if you're a good guy or a bad guy. It's that well written. You're just, whoa,
no, I know,
you know?
Yeah,
are you going to Longmire? What's going on?
I tell people if they want to hear it, you know, I think that Jacob and Walt have a lot in common, which is part of the reason they're such loggerheads. You know, people say, well, you're so mean, you're so bad. And I admit that Jacob is rude. He's extremely rude. But, you know, he breaks the rules in much the same vein that Longmire breaks the rules. Longmire will do anything to advance what he perceives to be the greater good. That's just the fact on the ground. So when people start saying...
It's the cowboy way.
It's the cowboy way.
Yeah.
You get it done. You do it, you know. And so I love that. And you know, I have been hearing for years, Greer Shepherd, who runs that show, I've been hearing through the grapevine that she liked my work and thought I was special and really was noticing me. And I'm thinking, well, that's good, because I've auditioned multiple times and never gotten a job, but it's nice to know that I'm well thought of. But, you know, I'd like to get a job, you know. And so I got to walk in the door for that. When I read it, I thought to myself, wow, this actually is something that I could get. Usually when I read something, I go, I can think of 10 guys who could do this as well as me, maybe better, if not 20. I mean, you know, when you're reading things that are less specifically character and more like kind of a trope or a type and stuff, I was thinking, yeah, I'm not in the pocket for this. If I get this, I'll be the third or fourth choice, like the Cowboys. But but when I read Jacob Nighthorse on a page, I thought, wow, this guy lines up. So I had felt confident, and when I went in the room and did it, I didn't screw it up. I didn't rush. I walked in like I owned the place. I pretended I was the guy, right? I walked in all slow, and I'm looking around. I'm acting like I'm unfazed. And I sit there, and I did it, and I look up, and everybody's smiling except the boss, Greer, and she's just looking at me like, she goes, this guy is a politician. So do you think you could do it again and find a way to be even slightly charming? And I'm thinking, oh, man. And, of course, this is not a note I'm unfamiliar with. So I thought, okay, A, you need to smile. You need to smile. So I basically forced myself to smile, even though it never would have occurred to me to smile in this scene until she said that. And then I looked up, and she was smiling. So,
well, it was a coup, a casting coup, because you are perfect for that. As is everybody else. Robert Taylor from Australia.
Yeah.
This guy's great.
Oh, I know.
And he looks older than you.
I know. I didn't know that he was from Australia till midway through the second season. He would drive onto the parking lot in character. And, you kind of go, wow, this is a guy.
He's
I
a
don't know
rancher.
where he's from. Right, he's some rancher. Then I remember somebody sends me a YouTube link, and he's like in Melbourne, like promoting a public garden, and he's an Aussie. He's totally shrimp on the barbie,
You've got, Graham Greene and Lou Diamond Phillips, whose dialogue is so specific and unique.
Yeah.
No contractions at all in what he's saying.
Right, and that comes down from the books. I think there are 17 or 18 Longmire books now by Craig Johnson. It's a brilliant construct, and among the things that...
Well, he's a great writer. I know you've done a couple of appearances with him, too.
Yeah. He's become a friend. And,
had you read the books before?
I had not. I was not aware of them at all. I was completely clueless about the whole thing. I remember walking up the stairs to the audition. It's at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood, this rundown old place. And I feel comfortable there. It's one of the few places in Hollywood I feel comfortable. I'm like, this is the kind of place I could understand I might have grown up in. So I'm walking up the hallway, and on the landing, there's a picture of Robert Taylor, and he's got his face is obscured. His head is down. His hat is covering his eyes, maybe his nose even, and he's got whiskers. And I'm thinking, oh, that's James Arness. That's Gunsmoke right there. That's like I see that, and I go, that's Jim Arness right there. And that was my first inkling of what they were going for. And they landed. The story is told there were more famous people who wanted that part and were angling pretty hard for it. And they kept kind of leaving Robert Taylor in the mix as they culled it. And at the final screen test, he was the only actor who walked into this woman's house to tell her that her husband had been killed. He was the only actor among all these fancy folks who had the wherewithal to step over the threshold and remove his hat as he told this woman the bad news. And they went, there he is. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that in the writer's room, they're bringing more Native Americans, Indigenous people in there to make it authentic. Is that true on Longmire also?
I don't think any of the writers are Indigenous, but Craig's best friend is this dude, Marcus Red Thunder. Craig lives hard against reservations, and he spends time. He has a lot of friends on reservations, and Marcus is among his closest friends. And Marcus, I believe, is the guy that he modeled Henry Standing There after. So he knows the stuff. He's legitimately steeped in the culture, and he doesn't write condescendingly toward it at all. The thing that's so great about every one of those characters, including all the Indigenous characters, is they're fully rounded human beings.
They are.
They are.
It makes a difference, and it just keeps the audience interested and on their toes. And the mystery element, too. Now, have you read the books now since you're on the show?
Yeah, I've read probably 6 or 7 of them.
And they're funny.
They're funny.
It's just like great stuff.
Some of the stuff, the one that's coming out in September is like a sequel to, he opened up this mysticism that's really, really scary, actually. And I'm looking forward to reading that so much. And in a book, a couple books ago, I think it might have been Depth of Winter, he does this for his friends. He based a character on me. And, what an honor to be held, to be put in that position by someone who writes like that. And of course, and not only that, he wrote me in a way that I would wish to be. You know, I would wish that I were as cool as the character he wrote for me. You know, so you kind of go. So he's a dear man. Yeah.
Well, he is. He can sure write. The characters are already developed in the books too. The dialogue that you all deliver is so real. Right. And I love the locations and everything too. And they shoot it in New Mexico, right?
New Mexico, you know, Wyoming doesn't have the infrastructure to really support that kind of production. And Greer brought Hunt Baldwin and John Coveney in. I think she was doing her previous show, The Closer, I believe. She brought them in as a writing tandem, and on year 2, they became the head writers. They're so good. And she brought them in to executive produce and write the show. And one of the reasons the show was so good is that the writing was so closely held. There were so few people that were involved in doing this story. I remember flying home season 2 when we did 13 episodes instead of 10, sitting next to Hunt on the plane, and he was just slaughtered. And I go, "What's up, dude?" He says, "Man, just doing 13 instead of 10. I mean, I barely can, you know, I'm cross-eyed."
Remember when they used to do 39?
39, right. But the difference was that it was like so much, they had so much more of a committee working on it. When you actually have like a really tightly held circle of thought, it helps keep the characters in clearer focus, but it just kills people. People have no idea how hard it is to write stuff like that.
And how hard it is to be on a show. Everybody thinks it's glamorous. You know, these 14, 16-hour days all the time, even if there are only maybe 10 episodes.
Right.
Those days are so long.
It's so long. And one of the great things about, you know, our show is that Rob Taylor is such a mensch. You know, I mean, he doesn't have an ounce of diva in him. You know, he's basically just a guy. He's a bloke. And, you know, he doesn't allow it to get weird. You know, everybody, even despite the hours and the fatigue, people basically mind their P's and Q's because, you know, the boss is like, you know, steady.
It wasn't a blind option, which was kind of nice. But this was actually a package deal with CAA. And what they did was they got a studio, Warner Brothers, and then they got the producers, the showrunners, the directors, the writers, everybody. And so I got to meet everybody before I signed on the dotted line, which was really kind of wonderful because I'll be honest with you, you know, I mean, come on, I'm a cowboy writer from a town of 25, you know, so I'm not going to march into Hollywood and go, well, this is how we're going to do this, you know, and so, you know, I mean, for me, it was kind of wonderful because I got to meet those people and then kind of gauge their interest in the material to see, you know, why did they really want to do this? I mean, that was, you know, some of the first things I asked, you know, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to make this into a television show? Why are these characters of interest to you? And then see what kind of questions they had for me, which was interesting because I remember one of the first questions that Greer Shepherd asked me was, she said, why did Walt go to USC? And I said, it was the 60s, and Walt was, you know, a national class, you know, offensive lineman. You know, what you want him to do? Go to Lincoln, Nebraska? You know, I mean, he's going to go to Southern Cal. He was going to go to Southern California. I mean, that's where the girls were, and that's where the convertibles were. You know, I mean, all of that. And so, but I thought it was interesting though that she had read closely enough that, you know, just that one little snippet that she picked up on, that wanted to know how that informed that character, and so then it was really kind of wonderful because the only real control I felt as though I had, especially at the get-go, at the very beginning, was it's kind of like ranching in the sense that you get the very best people you can get to work with, and then you do the hardest thing in the world. Leave them alone. Let them do what they do, okay? This was a group that had won Emmys. This is a group that produced, you know, I don't know how many, you know, award-winning TV shows and all this. It would be kind of stupid for the cowboy from a town of 25 to go, well, I don't think Walt would wear a green shirt, really. Who cares what color shirt Walt's wearing? You know? So you have to be, I think, open to the idea that there are going to be some changes made, and that the people that are making those changes might know a little bit about what it is that they're doing.
But yeah, Craig, we just got to know each other, and after a few years, he finally busted out what he was working on, Longmire, all this time, and it took a while for you to pull it out of that bottom drawer for a while, work on it, put it back in, work on it. But I'm sure grateful you had the courage and the confidence to ask me.
Now, as technical advisor to the show, what was your principal responsibility?
Make sure they get it right. You know, for me, it's a big responsibility because this is going out to all over the world, and so it's kind of stressful. Make it right, and I learned early in the show that it's not a documentary. That's pretty big to know because I wanted them to go by the book when it first started. Then after a while, it's art is what it is. It's an artistic, and I have to work with the directors because they have their artistic view of what's happening. And sometimes it was contrary to the way that I saw it, but we worked it together, and overall, they did a great job.
And I loved it when I read it. I've been hearing for years that Greer Shepard had a high opinion of me, who was running the show. And I'd auditioned for her probably 6 times and never gotten a job. So I was thinking, well, I hope that high opinion,
Starts manifesting.
I don't know what I gotta do. I mean, I know she likes me, but I don't know. When I read the text, I was thrilled because I really felt an affinity for the poetry of the language that they gave to Jacob, and then they developed throughout the course of the show. What was weird, though, was as the story was told to me, Jacob was not supposed to hang around. He was going to be sort of blamed for the great tragedy in Walt's life, and they were going to make short use of him. That was the story that was told to me. So when I went to finally do it, that first scene in episode 2, a damn shame, and that little sweat scene in there. That's what. So I had 2 seconds of screen time in my first episode. The scene that I actually auditioned with, which was the scene of Jacob in the red pony with Walt, and Jacob is running the table, the pool table, and basically humiliating Walt in the room, and giving some backstory, and it was a nice 3-minute beautiful thing, and they cut the whole thing out and never showed it. And it's funny, I had a feeling what was happening. They kept not scheduling it and not scheduling it and not scheduling it. In fact, it kept me in my hotel room so long that the hotel thought I had moved out. One day I got a knock on the door and there's 2 really angry people like, "What are you doing in there?" So they ended up finally shooting it at the end of the last day, and they rushed through it. I thought anyway, it never showed on the screen. But they said in episode 5, you're going to look good when the dog soldier story comes up, right? So I came back to do that, and they introduced me to Marcus. And of course, one of the things that happens to you if you're somebody who's not going to be around a long time, if they think that's the case, they don't want to tell you anything. Because they're so afraid that anything that they tell an actor is going to go on Facebook and will spoil something and will hurt the ratings, right? I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I tried out for an episode of Castle, and they wouldn't let me read the script until I agreed to do the part, right? Which is just wrong. I said to my manager, I said, "This is ridiculous. How am I supposed to know if I want to do this if I don't know what it is?" He goes, "That's true, it's ridiculous. And there's 10 people waiting in line behind you to say yes. You don't want to do it." So I found my way to do it. Anyway, so I don't know what is really going on with Jacob beyond this one scene that I played that I could tell they didn't really care for that much on some level. So I met Marcus, and Marcus spoke to me about the things he knew about Jacob, which were tenfold greater than what I knew. So in the course of the conversation, I was able to start to get my head around what it was I was actually embarking upon. I think the thing that most lit me up was the interesting juxtaposition of his appetites as a businessman, as a person who practices a certain ruthless corporate ethic with a background as a political radical.
I thought that was an amazing kind of thing to put together in the character.
You know, Walt Longmire is not exactly a spring chicken, okay? Walt's an older guy, okay? So any actor that was gonna play Walt was gonna have to be at least 50, 60 years old, right? Well, the difficulty with that is if you're an actor and you're in Hollywood and you're 50 or 60 years old and you're still unknown. Back me up on this. You might suck, you know? Hollywood is really nervous about the whole suck thing, I gotta tell you. So then, you know, whenever Robert, you know, and it was funny, like, because they said, you know, well, do you ever think about actors when you think about Walt Longmire? And I said, no, I've got friends and family, people I work with, and they're all the people that I look at as characters in my books. And they said, well, if you were to think about actors to play Walt Longmire, who do you think of? And I was like, Joel McCrae, Ben Johnson, Gary Cooper would be a good Walt. They said that was no help at all because all those guys have been dead for 40 years. So I told them I wasn't going to be much help in all of this. Like, and so then they sent the DVDs. Like, and so we're sitting there going through the DVDs, and we get to the last one. They had them rubber banded. Like, and so I knew this is what they planned. They planned, you know, for Robert Taylor to be the last DVD in the stack. And I pull it out and it says Robert Taylor, and I was like, well, they took my advice after all. So glad you guys laughed. The Bernie crowd does not get that joke at all. Robert who? But anyway, like I put the DVD in, like, and this guy comes on, like he's about 6'3", about 220 or so, and he's got lines on his face. He's got this gravelly voice, you know, and he's really kind of clicking. He's really working. And one of the things that really was great about it is that in the audition, he's doing a notification of death. And law enforcement's the worst job you can get. Basically what you're doing is going to someone's home, a stranger's home, and telling them that their loved one is never coming home. It's just the worst job in the world. Like, and Walt doesn't know this woman. He's never been in her home before. And Robert Taylor was the only actor that did this. That's our guy. His mom taught him basic decency, like, you know, so we don't have to do that part at least, right? So I'm feeling really good about Robert Taylor. It was about then that my wife sitting behind me went, oh my. I turn around and I look at her and she goes, you know, he's kind of like a TV version of you, taller, better looking, and a better voice. I'm not as big a fan of Robert Taylor as I used to be.